Until recently, I worked as a waiter in a restaurant that could only be described as a shady, run-down hole on the outskirts of town. I was there out of necessity. The job was temporary, something to pay the bills while I searched for something better, but each shift felt like it lasted an eternity. On that particular night, I was already counting down the minutes until the end of my shift when he walked in. It was almost closing time, and the restaurant was practically empty. I was cleaning a table near the entrance when a man walked in. He looked like he was in his early 30s, maybe a bit older, but something in his gaze made me feel uneasy right away. He had a strange smile, more like a grimace than a friendly expression. But what really bothered me was the way he looked at me, like I was just another item on the menu rather than a human being. He sat down at one of the tables near the window and ordered something quick, almost as if he wanted to prolong his stay. As I served his food, he tried to strike up a conversation, asking personal questions and making comments he probably thought were funny. "Have you been working here long?" he asked, in a tone that didn't come across as friendly. I tried to stay professional, only answering what was necessary, but with each new attempt at flirting, my discomfort grew. He seemed completely oblivious to my unease, or maybe he just didn't care. When it came time to pay, he made another awkward joke about me being all alone in a place like this. I could barely force a smile as I took the money and wished him a good night. I just wanted him to leave and leave me alone. As soon as the clock signaled the end of my shift, I rushed out of that restaurant. The feeling of relief was immediate as I crossed the door, leaving behind that place that felt more and more suffocating. The night air was cool, and I took a deep breath, trying to shake off the tension that had built up throughout the day. My route home was always the same, a few dimly lit streets that cut through the neighborhood, a shortcut that saved me time. I was about 2 blocks away from the restaurant when I sensed that something was wrong. It's hard to explain, but you know that feeling of being watched? My body tensed up instinctively, and my once relaxed pace quickened. I looked back over my shoulder, and to my surprise, I saw that the man from the restaurant was following me. The first time I looked, he was at a reasonable distance, walking casually, as if he was just heading in the same direction. I tried to rationalize, convincing myself it was just a coincidence, but the discomfort he had caused me earlier came back in full force. I kept walking, trying not to look worried, but with every step I took, he seemed to close the gap between us. My mind started racing. I thought about changing direction, but I didn't want to look suspicious, or worse, give him the impression that I was scared. But the fear was already there, growing inside me. What did he want? Why was he following me? I began to walk faster, hoping he would give up, but he kept coming. I looked back again, and now he was closer, and this time I was sure he was following me. He stared at me with that same weird smile, as if he was enjoying my discomfort. I knew I had to act. I saw a side street to my left and turned abruptly, hoping to lose him. My heart was pounding, and panic started to set in. I heard quick footsteps behind me. He had picked up the pace. I turned onto a narrower street, an alley that would normally buy me some time, but when I looked back, there he was, closer than ever, muttering things I couldn't understand. My body went into fight or flight mode. My breathing was heavy and erratic. I knew I couldn't keep running forever. At some point, he would catch up to me. I looked around, desperate, and saw a broken glass bottle lying near a pile of trash cans. Without thinking twice, I grabbed the bottle, holding it tightly. If he wanted to catch me, I wasn't going to make it easy. I stopped suddenly and turned to face him, my chest rising and falling rapidly. "Stop following me," I shouted, my voice trembling more than I wanted. He paused for a moment, surprised by my sudden change in demeanor, but soon that strange smile returned to his face. He didn't reply, just kept advancing, now quicker, with an expression that mixed amusement with something darker. I knew I had no choice. When he got close enough, I swung the bottle at him. He tried to dodge, but the bottle cut through the air and slashed his skin, leaving a trail of blood. He let out a cry of pain, but it only seemed to make him angrier. The man lunged at me, and I fought with everything I had, trying to keep him at bay. We both fell to the ground, rolling as we struggled. He was stronger than I had imagined, and soon I felt his weight on top of me, his hands gripping my neck, trying to choke me. Desperation gave me strength I didn't know I had. I managed to drive the broken bottle into his arm, making him cry out in agony and release his grip for a moment. I seized the opportunity and shoved him with all my strength, breaking free and running as fast as I could. I didn't look back, didn't care if he was following me or not. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs nearly gave out. I only stopped when I reached a busy avenue with cars passing by and people coming and going. I looked back, gasping for air, and saw that he was no longer there. The feeling of relief was immediate, but the fear still lingered, a shadow hovering over me. I knew I wouldn't be safe until I got home. I kept running until I reached my building, my hands trembling as I tried to find the keys in my pocket. Finally, I managed to get inside and lock the door behind me. I went straight to the windows, making sure everything was locked and secure. My whole body was shaking, and I could feel cold sweat dripping down my face. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat in the dark, listening to every sound from outside, hoping he hadn't followed me there. The next morning, I had made a decision. I wasn't going back to that restaurant. No matter how much I needed the money, my life was worth more. For almost 2 years, I worked as a waitress in a diner that stayed open late. It was one of those places with a retro charm, red booths, a jukebox in the corner, and a neon sign flashing in the window. It looked like the perfect 1950s diner set, and I loved the atmosphere, at least during the day. But when night fell, things changed. The nighttime customers weren't the same as the morning and afternoon crowd. They were stranger, and the once cozy atmosphere became slightly unsettling. One night, close to midnight, he walked in. His name was Zephyr, and unlike most of the regulars who would sit quietly and eat their meals, he had a persistent gaze that seemed to follow me around the place. There was something about his demeanor that made me uncomfortable from the start, but I tried to brush it off. After all, I was there to work, not to judge. Zephyr chose one of the booths by the window and beckoned me over with a slow wave of his hand. His tone was soft, almost seductive, but something about the way he spoke made my skin crawl. He started with small talk, nothing major, just comments about the weather or questions about the menu. However, as the night went on, his interactions became more intrusive. "You have a beautiful smile, Lysandra. How does a girl like you end up working so late?" he asked, with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. I tried to keep my composure, responding politely, but maintaining a professional distance. Still, he persisted. By the end of his meal, he left a folded napkin next to his tip. When I went to clear the table, I saw he had written his phone number on it, along with a note that said, "Call me anytime." I laughed nervously and threw the napkin away. But the truth was, he didn't seem like the type of person who would take no for an answer. That night, as I left the diner, I felt a slight unease, but I convinced myself there was nothing to worry about. I was used to dealing with odd customers, and I thought he would just be another one. After that first night, Zephyr began showing up with alarming frequency, always during my shift, as if he knew exactly when I would be there, and each time he walked through the door, that uneasy feeling in the pit of my stomach returned with full force. He always chose the same booth, the one by the window, as if to let me know he was watching me the whole time. At first, I tried to ignore him, keeping our interactions to a minimum, but he didn't make it easy. Zephyr wasn't the type to be satisfied with a simple, "Hi, what can I get you today?" He wanted more, always more. One night, as I was serving his coffee, I noticed he had his phone in his hand, the camera pointed at me. I quickly turned away, pretending I hadn't seen it, but the fear started to grow. That's when the notes started. He left them folded next to his tip, each one more personal and unsettling than the last. "You look so beautiful when you smile," one read. "I think about you when I'm not here," said another. I wanted to throw them all away, but they started piling up in my mind, forming a mosaic of harassment that I couldn't ignore. The situation escalated when, one night, I received a text message from an unknown number. The text read, "I liked your dress today." My heart raced. I looked around the diner, trying to figure out who could have sent it, and my eyes fell on Zephyr, who was staring at me with that cold smile. He had gotten my number. I didn't know how, but he had invaded my life in a way I never imagined possible. The messages didn't stop. He sent pictures of me, taken from angles I hadn't noticed. Pictures of me at work, sometimes smiling at a customer, other times cleaning a table. It was like he was everywhere, watching my every move. Each new photo left me more terrified, and the thought that he was monitoring me so closely became unbearable. I started changing my routine, trying to shake him off. I left through different doors, took alternate routes home, and even changed my shift times. But nothing seemed to work. He was always there, somehow, waiting, watching. One night, as I was heading home, I felt that he was following me. I looked over my shoulder, and there he was, just a few meters away, walking in the same direction as me. Panic consumed me, but I kept walking, hoping he would give up. However, every time I changed direction, he did the same. The breaking point came on an especially quiet night. I had just closed up the diner and was walking home, trying to ignore the growing feeling that I was being followed. My mind was on high alert, every sound amplified by the fear that was building inside me. When I reached my building, a wave of relief washed over me. I quickly went inside and locked the door, hoping that would be enough to protect me. I climbed the stairs to my apartment, still nervous but trying to calm myself down. After all, I was home, safe, but as I approached the window in my living room, my heart nearly stopped. Zephyr was there, outside, standing on the sidewalk, looking directly at me. Fear turned into pure panic. He knew where I lived. He was just a few meters away, and I had no idea what he planned to do. It was clear he wasn't content with just watching from a distance. In that moment, I realized I had no choice but to act. I called a close friend, Bianca, and explained the situation. Bianca was horrified and came to get me right away. Together, we decided that I needed to leave, disappear before Zephyr could do anything else. There was no time to waste. I spent that night packing what I could, not knowing exactly where I would go. Bianca offered me a temporary place to stay at her house, far from my neighborhood, and I accepted without hesitation. I blocked Zephyr's number, deleted my social media accounts, and cut any ties that could allow him to find me. I was on the run, but I knew it was the only way to feel safe again. The following days were a whirlwind of emotions. The move, the constant fear, the feeling of always being watched, even though he was no longer around. I knew I had made the right choice by leaving, but the trauma Zephyr had caused didn't fade easily. Over time, I began to rebuild my life. I found a new job in a place where he couldn't find me, and with the help of Bianca and other friends, I started to feel a bit safer, but the shadow of that period still loomed over me. I avoided certain places, stayed on high alert, and every time I received a message from an unknown number, my heart would skip a beat. However, I was determined to move forward. I couldn't let Zephyr or anyone else control my life. It had been tough, and the fear was still there, but I knew that with each day, I was one step further away from the nightmare he had created. Now, in my new home, far from the diner and everything that happened, I'm finally starting to feel like myself again. And although the scars remain, I'm learning to live with them, knowing that I'm stronger than I ever thought I could be. My name is Ethan, and I was on a solo trip through Brazil, specifically in Angra dos Reis. I've always had a fascination with exotic places and breathtaking landscapes, so Angra seemed like the perfect destination. I had rented an Airbnb in the Vila Velha neighborhood, a quiet area close to some of the most beautiful beaches I'd ever seen. My Portuguese was fairly good, which helped me get by in the city, and I was determined to make the most of every moment of this trip. That evening, I decided to explore the historic center of Angra. I wanted to try the local cuisine, so I chose a well-known restaurant called Canto das Canoas, which was located on Praia do Jardim. The place was cozy, with a spectacular view of the bay, and I quickly settled into a table near the window, enjoying the sea breeze as I savored my dinner. It was during the meal that he appeared. A man named Marcelo, who looked to be in his 40s, approached with a broad smile. At first, it seemed like a casual interaction. He complimented my Portuguese, something I'd heard a few times during the trip. "Your Portuguese is really good," he said, pulling out a chair without asking and sitting across from me. "You must have practiced a lot." I smiled politely and replied that I had, but the conversation quickly took a strange turn. Marcelo began asking personal questions: where I was from, how long I'd be in Angra, where I was staying. Each question seemed like an attempt to get closer, to break through the barrier I was trying to maintain. I tried to be cordial, but my intuition started to signal that something was off. After a while, I began to feel uncomfortable and indicated that I needed to go. I paid the bill and stood up, thanking him for the company and saying that I needed to get back to my Airbnb. Marcelo insisted on walking me to the door, but I politely declined, thanking him again and leaving the restaurant, hoping he got the message. As I left Canto das Canoas, I was determined to leave that uncomfortable interaction behind and head back to my Airbnb. The night was pleasant, and the city seemed calm. I decided to take a walk, soaking in the atmosphere of Angra, passing by the old mansions and narrow streets of the historic center. I wasn't in a hurry, I just wanted to relax after that strange encounter. But as I walked down Rua do Comercio, I felt a chill. I can't quite explain why, but something made me glance over my shoulder. That's when I saw him. Marcelo was there, just a few meters away, walking in the same direction, keeping a steady pace. At first, I thought it might be a coincidence. Maybe he was heading home or just walking in the same direction. But as I continued on, I realized he was maintaining the same distance, as if he were following me. My mind started racing, trying to find a logical explanation, but the discomfort only grew. I decided to change my route, turning onto a different street that led to the Igreja Matriz. I passed by the Mercado Redondo, a popular tourist spot during the day but now deserted. Marcelo was still behind me, as if he knew exactly where I was going. Fear began to set in. I quickened my pace, cutting through Praia do Anil, hoping he would give up. But Marcelo kept coming, his presence now unmistakable. When I finally reached the Vila Vela neighborhood, my worry turned into panic. Did he know where I was staying? How was that possible? I was just minutes away from my Airbnb, but with every step I took, the sense of danger grew. I reached the door of my lodging, almost running. I quickly went inside, locking the door behind me with trembling hands. The silence inside the Airbnb was almost deafening. I could barely breathe, my heart pounding so hard it seemed to echo through the room. I tried to convince myself that maybe Marcelo had given up, that he had no reason to continue. But deep down, I knew that was just desperate hope. Minutes passed, maybe even an hour, and I forced myself to relax. That's when I heard the sound. At first, it was just a scratching at the door. I stayed still, thinking it might just be my imagination, but the sound continued, followed by a stronger attempt to force the lock. I ran to the door, my whole body taken over by a wave of panic, and looked through the peephole. There he was, Marcelo, trying to get in, his face twisted into an expression I could only describe as obsessive. He was trying to break in, and I was alone, with no one to call for help. Without hesitation, I grabbed my phone and called the police. I tried to explain the situation in Portuguese, my voice trembling as I spoke, each second feeling like an eternity. On the other end of the line, the dispatcher assured me that a patrol car was on its way, but I knew it could take time. While I waited, I searched for something to defend myself, anything that could give me a chance if he managed to break the door down. I found a heavy metal rod that held up the curtains and gripped it tightly, desperation replacing fear. Marcelo kept forcing the door, muttering things I couldn't quite understand. All that went through my mind were the dispatcher's words, repeated like a mantra. Hold on, the police are on their way. Then, as if the minutes had stretched into hours, I heard the sirens in the distance. The sense of relief was overwhelming, but it still wasn't safe. Marcelo paused for a moment, noticing the blue lights reflecting on the street. He hesitated, maybe trying to decide whether to keep going or flee. But before he could do anything, the police were at the door, ordering him to back away. Chaos ensued as Marcelo was apprehended. He struggled a bit, but he didn't stand a chance against the officers. I unlocked the door with trembling hands, allowing the police to enter. They asked quick questions, trying to understand what had happened. Everything felt surreal, as if I were trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Marcelo was taken away by the police, still muttering to himself as he was put into the patrol car. I remained there, standing in the doorway, watching as the police lights faded into the distance, taking away the man who had turned my night into a living hell. Later, when the adrenaline finally began to wear off, the reality of what had happened hit me hard. I spent the rest of the night awake, trying to process what could have happened if the police hadn't arrived in time. By morning, I made a decision. My trip was over. I needed to leave Angra dos Reis and put as much distance between myself and that experience as possible. I packed my bags quickly and contacted the Airbnb host, explaining that I needed to leave early. He was understanding, noting the urgency in my voice. I caught the next bus to Rio de Janeiro, leaving Angra behind.